Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this College Sector Employment Services webinar on building resilience. I'm Linda Ryan. I'm the ED of the CSIS group, and just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Just want to let you know you're all in listen only mode, and we generally will save questions till the end of the webinar. But if you do have a question, please feel free to use the question box or the chat box. I'll be monitoring that as we go through Danny's presentation. If you are interested in obtaining the slides from the webinar, Danny has graciously agreed that we may take those. So just reach out to me via email once you get the email from GoToWebinar, and I'll be happy to get those off to you when Danny gets them to me. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Danielle Proser from Conestoga College, who's presenting our webinar this morning. And Danny, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda, and for the College Sector Employment Services for inviting me to facilitate this webinar. Thank you everyone who's joining us today as we look at building resiliency and learning to bounce back when things get tough in our jobs. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So throughout all aspects of our life, there are definitely people who have a tendency to panic and withdraw at the first sign of trouble. And then there are those who thrive on these sorts of challenges. And when we do learn to thrive in these challenges, that's when we're showing resiliency. So while I was preparing for this webinar today, I did come across a really good analogy that I wanted to share with everyone. And it's from the American Psychological Association on building resiliency. So they use the analogy of imagining that we are going to take a rafting trip. Sometimes the water is going to be shallow and calm and peaceful, and then other times the water is going to be quite rapid and rough. To make sure that we are traveling safely and we're prepared for any unexpected problems, there are things that we can do beforehand that are going to improve our chances at having a successful journey. Some of these things may be enlisting some additional training so that we feel a bit more confident, seeking out help from more experienced rafters that are around, and having the necessary tools like a life jacket or working on our physical exercise so that we're feeling more physically able to take this journey. And with these tools and supports, we'll be able to make it through the challenges of our river adventure, and we're going to emerge as more confident and skilled rafters. All right, so let's take a look at how we can make sure that we are the resilient ones in our life and in our workplace challenges that arise. So to start, I wanted to talk about what exactly resiliency is anyways. So another analogy that we could use is to imagine that we're each an elastic band. Things and people in life are going to stretch us. If we stretch too far, we may snap. Or if we release too quickly, we also may snap. And so the idea of resiliency is we want to be able to spring back into our regular shape without snapping. And so when we can do that, that is an example of showing resiliency. So resiliency is a learned behavior. It's something that all of us can learn to do. Like many work and life situations, we can identify it as a skill. We can develop some strategies to be able to overcome adversity and continue on with business as usual. We can also learn from our own as well as other people's past experiences so that we learn what works and what doesn't. So for today, when we're looking at some skills and some strategies for resiliency, I'm going to focus on 3 pillars: building resiliency within ourselves, building resiliency within our relationships, and you can apply this to your daily life, to your personal relationships, as well as your work relationships, as well as developing resiliency through our habits. All right. So when we're looking at ourself, I'm focusing on our internal self. So our reactive emotions. We're all aware that we react and behave differently in different situations. And these different situations can produce emotional responses within us. So in regards to the workplace, some situations that we may experience is I'm running late for work. And the emotional response that a lot of us will feel when that happens is panic or worry. Another situation could be that a customer is upset about a situation that's happened, and so they're demonstrating their feelings, maybe yelling, they may be upset. And sometimes our emotional response to that situation could be we ourselves become angry or we start to feel threatened. Another situation could be where we make a mistake, because they do happen. And very often our emotional response in those situations is we feel shame or we feel embarrassed because we haven't been perfect. And sometimes the situation is my manager wants to have a chat with me. And this can often bring about fear in us, a feeling that we're about to get in trouble. So let's look at how, our emotions kind of manifest in those situations. Typically, the majority of us have a tendency to jump to the worst possible conclusion. And these are kind of think traps. These strong emotions, which have a tendency in our mind to be negative, they can trap us in. And when we have this kind of train of thought, it is very often accompanied by negative self-talk, so that voice we hear inside of our heads, as well as us versus them language. And so when we get stuck in these thought traps, it's really important to recognize when this is happening, because once we recognize it, we can start to prevent it and start to adapt our train of thought so that we can begin to start thinking and acting more effectively. So 2 ways to do that. When one of those situations arise and we start to, fall into these think traps, let's take a moment, recognize that we're in a think trap, and start to gather some information. Because like I said, our first thought can very often be negative and we jump to conclusions. We always assume the worst. And that's not always the correct thought. So I suggest we take a moment and gather all the information we can about this situation. When we do that, we'll be more prepared to react appropriately. It's also important in these moments to consider possible alternatives. Instead of just that one negative trap that we've fallen into, what are some variables that may also be possible? So we could start by first, we're going to do it anyways. Imagine the worst first. What is the worst possible thing that can happen in this scenario? Now I want us to stop ourselves and then imagine the best thing that could happen in this scenario. How good could this possibly be? How could we turn this into something good? And then thirdly, imagine what the most likely scenario is. And chances are 9 times out of 10, it'll probably be somewhere in between that worst scenario that we thought of first and that best scenario that we thought of second. Okay. And so I would suggest we try and prepare for how to react to this third situation, this in the middle situation. In those situations that I gave an example of, and when we're talking about ourselves, use the example of my manager wants to speak with me. Worst possible scenario, we might get reprimanded for something. We may be getting in trouble. Our manager has to speak to us about something. The best possible scenario, maybe we're getting complimented by our manager. Maybe our manager wants to offer us a promotion. Maybe our manager just wants to ask if we're able to take a shift. Could be any one of those things. And then think about what's in between. Potentially, it could be that our manager just needs us to take an additional shift. Maybe our manager would like us to do a couple of extra responsibilities. So focus on how you would react to that middle scenario. By doing that, you're taking into consideration a little bit of the worst possible case scenario as well as the best possible case scenario. So we have a more well-rounded set of reactions that we can pull from. Speaking about the workplace and possibly asking someone to take a shift, our coworkers are a great resource when it comes to building resiliency. And for when we're talking about our relationships, I love to use the analogy of geese in flight. I'm sure many of us have heard, of the story of the geese and how they work together. They fly as a group. When they do that, they're making the work easier as opposed to each of these geese flying independently on their own. Right, that V formation helps them so that one person is taking the lead and everyone else has a bit of a lighter workload. And when the geese do this, they take turns doing the heavy work, which allows everyone in the group to move on to the back, have a chance to rest, to refocus, regroup. And so it's a continual rotation. Not sure if you also knew this, but when one of the geese in the flock is sick or becomes injured, it will stay behind, and two of the healthy geese will also stay behind with it for support, to either help it as a group to get back with the main flock or to protect it while it is recovering. And if it does pass away, those two geese can then work as a team to rejoin the group, but they don't leave anyone behind. They work together as a group. And I think that's a great analogy that we can use in the workplace when we're trying to build resiliency with our coworkers. So when we start a job, whether it's your first job or it's just a new job, find your goose. We want to get to know our coworkers. And when we're first doing that, keep in mind, who is it that we're working with that we feel that we'd be comfortable to go to for help? It's great when we have one person that we feel we can rely on for assistance. Maybe there's more than one person, but we definitely want to find at least that one person that can be a supportive goose for us, that'll stick behind with us, that we can go to if we have a question. It's just, it will make us feel like we're a part of the team and that we're not doing all of this alone. So there are definitely going to be times where in our jobs we have the knowledge and skills so that we can be the lead. And that is fantastic. We can, be at the forefront, supporting our team, pulling them through a situation. But there are also going to be other opportunities where maybe we need to take more of a back seat, where we need to rely on one of our other coworkers for them to take the lead. Okay, in both of those situations, it's okay. When we're taking the lead, that's great. When we need to step behind and allow someone else to take the lead, that's also really valuable. We can learn from those experiences. So long as we are part of the team and making contributions whenever we can, it is okay to be able to go to a coworker, ask for help while we are still developing those skills. So when you start a new job, definitely find your goose. Find that person that can be your support in the workplace, because we never have to do any of it on our own. Another thing with relationships is how we respond in these relationships. So Thomas Harris coined the term transactional analysis. And what it is coming up with how we react to other people so that we have win-win interactions. And this can be applied to our coworkers, to customers, to friends, to family, anybody. And so there are three different areas. There's the parent reaction, the adult reaction, and the child reaction. So we'll look at what's defined as each of these reactions now. So a parent's reaction, and it doesn't mean actually being a parent, it's just the term that they use to describe how we react, would be when we react in a commanding tone, where we use words like never, should, ought, and always. So in a situation where someone has come up to us and said, this isn't good enough, something must be done. So maybe imagine a customer coming up and saying that. If our reaction to that customer is saying, it's horrible, isn't it? It's the computer's fault, then we are reacting in that kind of parent style. The next one is the adult style. And this is more of a fact-finding strategy. And we may be considering the W5H, who, what, where, when, why, and how, to gather information. So in the same scenario where the customer says, this isn't good enough, something must be done, the adult style reaction would be saying something like, I do see the issue. What can I do to make it right? And thirdly, we have the child reaction. And this is an inherently emotional reaction. And we may use words like, I wish, gonna, don't want, or won't. So again, in that same scenario, this isn't good enough, something must be done. If we are using the child scenario to react, we may say something like, it's not my fault. I had nothing to do with it. Now, out of all three of these reactions, when we are responding using resiliency, our response will follow in line with this adult reaction, fact-finding and trying to make it right. So we want to start to incorporate into our interactions with our friends, with our customers, with coworkers, with our family, that more adult voice when we are having these interactions, because they are the most likely, it's the most likely scenario that will result in a win-win interaction, where both the person we're interacting with, the person we're having a relationship with, and ourselves or our organization, it will be successful for all. The last pillar that I want to talk about with everyone are our habits. And this one's a little bit of a big one because we have a number of habits in our daily life. And all of our daily habits influence who we are, how our brain works and how we think, as well as how we behave and how we cope in different situations. Our self-care definitely has a significant impact on both our opinions of ourselves, so our self-esteem, as well as how we handle ourselves with the world around us. And this does include our work. So for today, the key areas of self-care that we're going to chat a little bit about in order to improve our resiliency are our daily diet, our sleep schedule, as well as our physical activities. And you can do quite a bit of research on building resiliency through our habits. And very often you'll find things like incorporating yoga into your daily routine, meditation, and those sorts of things are absolutely valuable. But I do know that a number of people are looking for things that they do already and how they can improve those things that we're already doing as a part of our daily life to build resiliency, instead of having to maybe incorporate new things like yoga and meditation. So I've left those ones out for today, but they are absolutely valuable and an important part of if we want to build resiliency through our self-care. So our daily diet. I'm sure we've all seen the commercials about someone that's hangry and the way they react to a situation when they are angry and hungry, as well as how their reaction and their emotions and response change when they've eaten something. So keep that in mind because that's an important part of resiliency. Okay, we can set ourselves up for success when we are maintaining a healthy diet. How we react and how we bounce back and how we even think on a daily basis requires brain power. And like a vehicle, without the proper fuel, it's not going to work as we want it to. It's not going to be as efficient as it could be. So we want to make sure that we are fueling our body so that we can, always be performing at our peak level. There is a direct correlation between stress and our digestive system. Okay, regardless of the type of stress that we are experiencing, whether it's work-related, school-related, relationship-related, our bodies will react the same to all of those situations. So when we think about our reaction to stress, think about anxiety or our fight or flight reaction. It is very similar. It's actually identical. So our bodies will react to the stress we experience similar to how we react when we are scared or when we feel that we are in a dangerous situation. That fight or flight response kicks in. So when this response kicks in, our body focuses all of its energy on our brain as well as our physical ability of our body. And that's something that's happened throughout as we've evolved, so that if we need to be very fast to run away from something, we can. If we need to fight something, we can. And I don't mean fighting people. I mean back in time where we may have had to fight a wild animal or something like that. But regardless, today, our body does the same thing. And when that happens, our reaction gives less priority to our digestion than it would to other functions. And when this happens, it decreases our digestion capacity, which can in turn lead to us feeling unwell. And that on its own can increase our stress without even considering whatever we're experiencing. And once that stressful situation has come and gone, our body goes into what's called recovery mode. And when we go into recovery mode, it increases our appetite as well as our cravings. And that's the idea of refueling in case that situation comes back. Now, when that happens, our metabolic rate hasn't caught up yet. It's quite slow at the time because it's still in stress mode, because our body is trying to conserve that energy. So yeah, we're hungry and we're craving different things, which we'll talk about in a minute. But how we are digesting that food has slowed down, and it takes a while for that to pick back up again. And it may not pick up for quite a while, depending on how long that stressful situation lasts. Long-term stress has been linked to a tendency of our body to store fat around the middle. So I have spoken to people who have been in stressful situations, ongoing, long-term stressful situations, like they're not happy at work and they feel like they're constantly having stomach pains and their stomach feels bloated. And that can be a direct relation to the stress they're experiencing and how that stress is impacting their digestive system and where their body is storing that extra fuel, which happens to be in the stomach area. So some tips if we are encountering these stressful situations, which we all will, on days where we know it's going to be a stressful day, because sometimes we can predict that it's going to be a rough day. I would suggest maybe eating less at our meals, but more often. So more of a grazing day. And the purpose for that is so that our body's metabolism is constantly going and it's not extreme highs and extreme lows. It's more of a continuum. Try and make a few more healthy choices. So foods that are rich in vitamin B are known to boost energy after stress. Foods rich in vitamin C are actually needed to produce the stress hormone. That's where the highest amount of vitamin C is kept. So we want, if we're using a lot of that hormone, we definitely want to replace that vitamin C nutrients into our system. And magnesium. Magnesium is known to relax our muscles and reduce anxiety. So I'm not sure about you, but I can tell when I'm stressed, my shoulders go up, my muscles get tense. And so by improving and increasing the amount of magnesium in my diet, I definitely notice that that starts to relax, as well as my heart rate and my worry. So that those feelings of anxiety definitely decrease when I increase the magnesium in my diet. It's also really valuable, especially during training, if we can incorporate in some memory-rich foods. So foods like fatty fish, blueberries, turmeric, broccoli, pumpkin seeds, nuts, eggs, green tea, and my favorite, some dark chocolate, are actually known to help improve memory function. When I was in university, I had a few professors that actually suggested while studying for exams, um, instead of, having chips or some candies, to try and have some dark chocolate while you're studying, because it actually does improve your brain's ability to store information, your memory capacity. Definitely increase your water consumption. Majority of us don't drink enough water on a good day, so definitely make sure you're trying to incorporate a bit more water in when you're feeling stressed. Try and reduce your alcohol amount, your sugar, and your salt. They just don't store well in stressful situations, so we want to minimize how much of that we're taking into our system, and our caffeine intake. When we get into that fight or flight mode, our heart rate increases enough as it is. Caffeine is just going to make us feel more uncomfortable because our heart is going to be racing even faster. The next area I'd like to chat about is our sleep schedule. So overall quality of life dramatically impacted by either good quality sleep or a lack of quality sleep. And this can influence how we behave and perform. I'm sure we've all woken up feeling extremely tired, and it really does take us a while to get going. And sometimes we can feel off for the whole day. And so all of that is a result of the sleep that we had. And I think people's biggest mistake about sleep is that we think that when we are sleeping, this is when our bodies and our minds shut down. And that's not the case. Sleep is actually a very active process for our bodies. It's when a lot of things happen that are crucial for processing the memories that we've made that day and being able to store them in our long-term memory, restoring our strength and energy, as well as strengthening our immunity. I mean, imagine when you're sick. What do we most often do? Lay on the couch, try and get as much sleep as we can, right? Very often studies tell us that when young children are growing, sleep is when the majority of that growth happens. So our bodies are very active while we're asleep. And it's our time to recharge and restore. So don't forget that, and don't undervalue how important sleep is when we're building resiliency. So when we have poor sleep, we're more likely to feel irritable, grumpy, and have a shorter temper. Right there, that on its own is going to impact our resiliency. If we're irritable, we're going to be more likely to snap if we think about that elastic band scenario. We're going to be grumpy, so we're not going to have that positive outlook in our mind, that positive language, that internal thought. And with a shorter temper, we're actually a shorter elastic band. So things that may normally, allow, that we handle, will be able to stretch a little further. When our temper is shorter, it will take less for us to react in a negative way. And right there it says reaction times are reduced. So we will react quicker and a bit more sharper when we have poor sleep. Poor sleep's also going to affect our ability to be creative and innovative. So when a challenging situation arises, we will be less likely to be able to use our creativity and innovation to come up with a solution. And that can be frustrating as well. We'll be less likely to concentrate and pay attention, which will increase our reaction to being irritable. And just in general, with all of these things together, we are going to be more susceptible to stress. So some habits that we can incorporate in to help us with our resiliency through building a stronger sleep habit is our sleep hygiene. And so that is the term that's kind of coined for cleaning up how we sleep so that it is more productive, better for our mental health as well as for our bodies. So the aim is a 7-hour goal. For some people, or 8-hour goal, sorry. For some people, 7 hours is okay. For some people, they require 9 hours, which is why on average, it is suggested to receive 8 hours of sleep. But it is a 3-hour, kind of a variable between 7 and 9 hours that majority of people require. Definitely try to limit our blue light screen time before bed. So that are things like our phones. And I do know that some phones you can actually change and turn on to night mode, where it changes the colors of the screen so that you aren't using the blue light anymore. So if you are using your screen late or near bedtime, I would suggest looking at your phone to see if you can incorporate in that nighttime mode so that it isn't impacting your inability to fall asleep. Try to dedicate your sleep space for sleeping. A lot of us, our bedroom is where we sleep, and we do a number of things in our bedroom. It may be where we play all our video games. It may be where we're chatting to all our friends on, Snapchat or the computer or whatever. But when we do that, we've created the mentality for ourselves that our bedroom is where we do a number of different activities. So our brain automatically starts to think about all these activities that we often do in our bedroom instead of keeping it focused as an area for sleep. When we take the video games and the other social activities out of our bedroom can become an area that is focused for sleep. And over time, our mind will start to recognize that when we are in our bedroom, that is what we do. Exercise and fresh air definitely helps to improve our ability to get a good night's sleep. I know for myself, if I've been outside all day, I'm able to fall asleep much faster, sleep much deeper, and wake up feeling much more refreshed. And if you are having maybe some challenges with falling asleep, things like having a warm shower or a warm bath will relax us, relax our bodies so that we are in a better physical space to be able to sleep. Now, it's important for us to remember that when we are starting to make changes to our sleep habits and trying to incorporate in a bit more sleep hygiene, that it's not going to happen overnight. On average, it takes approximately 3 weeks to make or break a habit. So if we are starting to make some of these changes, give it a bit of time. Give it 3 weeks, then see how you're feeling. Another habit to focus on when we're talking about building our resiliency is our physical activity. So we've evolved from nomadic ancestors. And when we were, traveling around the lands, moving around from area to area, we were doing just that. We were physically moving quite a bit. We were looking for food, looking for shelter, traveling to, a new camp area. And this happened on a daily basis. Our bodies have been designed over time to do regular daily physical activity. So now, as we are looking at jobs where we may be sitting in an office or being less physically active, that can lead to some problems. Even when we're at home all day, if we're currently unemployed, how much of that time are we sitting? If we spend a lot of time sitting at a desk, sitting playing video games, sitting watching TV, sitting on our phone, we are minimizing the amount of exercise we do. So we definitely want to try to incorporate in more physical activity. And it doesn't have to be vigorous physical activity. It could be moderate or even light physical activity. But we definitely want to try to improve the amount of activity we do in a day and decrease how much time we're sedentary sitting and being physically immobile. So some of the benefits of being physically active, there are many physical benefits, all right? We know what most of those are, but there are a number of mental benefits to our mental health. And that's where the resiliency side of things is going to kick in. When we exercise or we engage in physical activity, our energy levels improve. And that improves those happy hormones that create feelings of positivity in us. Exercise also improves our brain function. So we'll be more creative, we'll be more ready to handle new situations, to be able to adapt to situations, because our brain will actually be getting exercise as well. As I mentioned when we were talking about our sleep hygiene, it improves your sleep. So people that are more active, studies have shown that they tend to sleep better than people that are less active. And through creating those happy hormones, exercise does improve our mood. So when we have to handle challenging situations, we're going to be more successful at being successful in those situations when we have a positive attitude to start with. All right. It also gives us an improved sense of well-being. It improves our self-esteem, so that positive self-talk in our brains. Exercise has also been known to help prevent and treat mental illness like depression. So there's absolutely nothing that's going to hurt us by being a little bit more physically active. And there's a great YouTube video out there about 23 and a half hours. And what that video talks about is, if we have to spend a lot of time sitting down at a desk or wherever, if we can try and improve or incorporate in 30 hours of physical activity a day, then there are a number of health benefits, mental health benefits, and physical health benefits that go along hand in hand with that. So what the video ends up doing at the end is asking us, if we're going to sit and not be physically active, can we keep that to only 23 and a half hours a day and be physically active for that last 30 minutes? Which I think is a great analogy, because it sounds like such a small thing for us to do, which many of us, I'm sure, are doing already, whether or not it's taking your pet for a walk. Right now, while social distancing, going outside for a walk with a friend and maintaining some space, that's a great way that you can socialize and connect with someone while still getting some physical activity in there as well. So let's review some of the stuff we talked about today in regards to building our resiliency. We want to build our resiliency within ourselves. So our self, that's our first pillar, by monitoring and controlling our emotional response to situations, by avoiding getting caught in these think traps, and by gathering information and considering possible alternatives. Building resiliency within our relationships, our second pillar. And similar to the strategy with the geese, we want to embrace our team, because then challenges are going to be easier to face. We want to be able to rely on those around us for guidance and for support. And we want to be responding maturely with polite, positive, and factual communication. And that's both internally, so within our own heads, as well as externally with the people we're interacting with. And then our third pillar, building resiliency through our habits, by understanding how our body reacts to stress and managing our daily diet to support brain function, by setting up an effective sleep schedule and some sleep hygiene so that our brain is rested, refueled, and more positive, and maintaining appropriate physical activity in order to improve our mood, our attitude, and our mental health. Because remember, we are hardwired to move. So overall, resiliency is absolutely something we can develop, and it's a skill we can learn to help us be better equipped to handle the challenges and stressful situations that are going to arise in our daily life and our work. Like building a muscle, we want to be able to increase our resiliency, but it does take time and intentionality. We need to think about it as we're learning to develop it. Focusing on the pillars of ourself, our relationships, and our habits is going to empower us to withstand and learn from any difficult or traumatic experiences so that we can successfully handle the different challenges and stresses that we may be faced with along our journey. And I apologize, I see a typo there, which I will go back and change before this gets sent out to everyone. So that's everything I've got for us today on some strategies to build resiliency in order to bounce back. If anyone does have any questions, I'm happy to have Linda step in to mediate the questions and answer anything that I can. Thank you all very much, and I wish you all the best.
So if you have any questions, you can put them into the question feature or the chat feature, and I'll just keep an eye on that for a second. Had a couple of thank yous already, Danny, so thank you on behalf of the group for sure.
Oh, you're very welcome.
One thing I did want to bring forward was, you know, that whole issue of being trapped in your head. I thought that was a really good way to describe it, because that does happen. And you know, perhaps I know, suffering from that myself over my years in my career, you know, that whole impacting your sleep and that whole idea of being trapped in your head. So I really like that idea of sort of imagining the three scenarios. And a tip that I always used to use was, when my head wouldn't shut off, I'd grab a little notepad and I'd write a few notes for myself. And just the whole act of writing it down helped me to get untrapped in my head. So I thought that was a really key point.
Yeah, it's I love the idea of writing things down. And if I facilitate this again, I think I will add that into it, because even when we have to write an email response to someone, you know, maybe taking some time before we write it, so that we can calm our emotions and that think trap mentality, to be able to look at those three pieces. What's the worst scenario? What's the best scenario? What's the scenario in between, before we write an email back to someone if we are feeling a bit emotional, is a great strategy to do. But yes, writing things down, journaling, is another very positive and very common building resiliency strategy, right there with like meditation and yoga. Those are three that we see quite a bit.
Yeah, and that you know, I've always heard that whole issue of, you know, take a pause before you send the email, or take a pause before you react, so that you know, you're a little calmer when you react. But I really like that phrase, respond factually. I think that's a really great technique to keep in mind. And that is one of the things you can learn to do, right? It
Yes.
doesn't, not necessarily come naturally, but you can learn to do that.
Yeah, it takes time, and you have to really be reflecting on your actions and your thought process to be able to do that. So being aware of how you're thinking, I think, is the first step, so that you're aware when you are being emotional and you need to be a bit more factual.
That's great. Well, Danny, thank you again for a really great presentation. For any of those who are interested, this will be ultimately posted on the college sector website, www.employmentcesis.ca, sometime over the next couple of weeks. And if you are interested in getting the slides from Danny, just reach out to me. And I thank you all for attending the webinar today. And until next time, thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.